That's so you got your kids there. You do. Hey, you do realize that we are now live, I think.
No, are we? Okay, cool.
Yeah. I like to just spring it on you like that.
Like Dan, yeah, it was what was there? Was there one day where Dan was like doing something? You're like, hey, we're live now.
Yeah. Yeah. I just thought it'd be funny to do it to you. Can I let you keep going about your story about your kid right there?
No, she's good. She's a good kid.
Am I good now to hit the button?
Yeah, let's send it.
Okay.
Welcome to the Whitetail Advantage Podcast with your host, Brett Bowen. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy the show.
Well, as everyone can see, this is not Dan. This is the
Not even
previous
close.
homeless hobbit that we had on an earlier show, Jason Van Dyken. Man.
Glad to be back.
Yeah, I don't know if I am. I think I just wanted to say hi. And I somewhat missed you, but I kind of didn't. But, I was like, you know what? Let's have him back on the show. He was kind of funny.
I bullied my way into being like an intermittent host when you guys need something in a pinch, eh?
Yeah, you did. You almost made me feel bad. You're like, wow, I guess I feel the love coming from you. But man, did you see my phone? My phone is blowing up about let me pull up the article about that Kansas City shooting.
No, I've not heard of that yet.
No?
So I don't follow the news that heavy. I don't have cable or anything, so I don't watch the news at all. But no, that's not come across any of my
Well, I get Fox News alert
anything.
and News Channel 3 alert. So
Okay.
Let me read like a quick piece of this beginning part of this article that started off. So apparently there was a shooting. Well, not apparently there was a mass shooting at the Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl parade.
Okay.
22. Let me take this back. 9 children are among the 22 injured by gunfire. In total, 11 children were injured. They ranged in age from 6 to 15. None of the children are in critical condition. They're all expected to recover. That's what the hospital said. Graves said, looks like Graves is the Kansas City police chief, said 8 of the wounded were considered immediately life-threatening patients. 7 others also had life-threatening injuries, and 6 sustained minor injuries. And they all were transported immediately to the Children's Mercy Hospital, Trauma Medical in St. Luke's. And there was also a video of one of the gunmen or whatever of the average Joe's, like the citizens in the area, tackling him. I was like, fuck yeah, man, you get him. There was like 6 people.
It was like 2. That's a weird shooting to hear about, though, with that many people being shot. And I'm glad that everyone sounds like they're not too messed up as far as the kids go, especially. But 1 for 22, like, you don't see those numbers when there's that many people that are hit.
No,
so that's that's a good thing that everyone's most of everyone besides the one person is going to pull through. But that's weird. No, I didn't even hear about that. Who fucking shoots up a Super Bowl parade?
I know. I was surprised. My phone was blowing up. I'm like, why is Fox News blowing up my phone right now? And I quickly read like the quick little notification. It said mass shooting at Kansas City police, Kansas City Super Bowl parade. It's like, what the fuck, man? It seems like every month there's some type of a shooting.
I mean, it's a softer target.
Oh yeah, I logistically, if that's perfect for a gunman because there's just so many people there.
Right.
So it was set up.
There's no way for the local or state government PDs or whatever have you to figure out exactly how many people are going to show up.
No, it's just, man, I don't know. That's just sad to hear. I'm glad
that's
to hear
weird.
that.
That's At least it sounded like they got them right off the bat, though. Them people that what were you saying? Is the people jumped on them there? People in the crowd or whatever?
Yeah, it looked like the police. The police were tackling one, or they were handcuffing one of them, and then one tried running through the people.
Okay.
And the regular Joes were like tackling them, and first it was one, then two, and then four more people come and
hell yeah, good for those guys
piling on top of them.
Yeah, hell yeah, good for them stepping up and taking care of business.
Man, gotta love those guys. But man, that was, I guess if you want, sad but good news. Somewhat sad that it happened. Good news that they were caught.
Right.
And I'm happy to see that there's people out there that are willing to help cops.
It doesn't cause a mass panic and everyone's running for themselves. There's individuals that are still willing to step up and help where it's needed in a situation that probably most of them aren't prepared or trained to handle.
Exactly. I mean, man, you and I, we've been through that training, and that's just it's a stressful just for the scenarios we go through. I mean, you can try to, but it's just, man, you can't really simulate any type of scenario like that.
I don't think we had any like crowd scenarios when I was in Kalamazoo training, but we had a lot of training scenarios in buildings.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah, I don't remember having any mass like ones like that, but it was more like school shootings, because that's in a time those were really hot. I'm not saying that they aren't anymore, but
I attended one night where they went into Crossroads Mall when it was closed, and staged people, civilians in there as mall goers, and then people in there shooting them up.
Heard about that training. Yeah, but enough about the news and all that bullshit.
Right.
We have an amazing guest tonight, dude. Like I said, I've been trying to get this guy on for a while now, but he finally was able to get the time. And I'm really appreciative because, man, he was busy for a while, just going from shooting event, and he's really appreciative of him taking the time to come talk to us, man. And we're going back to Arkansas, and then we're talking to Richard.
Right on.
So I'm gonna play the applause and let him in. You good with that, Jason?
Yeah.
I want to make sure you feel happy.
I'm prepared now. Now that I know we're actually going here, I'm ready.
Okay, at least you have some knowledge of everything. Hello, Richard.
Hey, guys.
Oh man, excited to have you on the show finally.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Oh man, so can you please introduce yourself to everyone, please?
Yeah, I'm Richard Bowen. I am in Arkansas. I'm a wildlife biologist for our state fish and game agency, and I'm also a professional shooter for elite archery.
Oh man, how long have you been doing that now? Both.
Roughly a decade or so. I've been shooting competitions for 10 years, roughly, maybe just a hair over 10 years. And I was with the state of Arkansas on the health department side as an environmental specialist prior to going to the game and fish. I think I started that in 2006. So I've been with the state for, several years. I've been with the Arkansas Game and Fish for 9 of those years. So got some time in both worlds.
Oh, wow. Man, what made you want to get into that line of work?
Actually, when I was a young teenager, probably 12, 13 years old, my uncle and my cousins and I would always go up to the big Bass Pro Shops that they have in Springfield, Missouri. I think it was in August every summer. They had a Moonlight Madness sale. We'd get our new camo, arrows and broadheads. We would stock up for the hunting season on an annual trip to that sale at that Bass Pro Shops. And they'd always have like celebrity hunters there. Bill Jordan was there. The Drury guys were there. They'd always have some celebrities doing seminars and talks and just kind of mingling around, talking to people. And there was a guy by the name of Larry Wysoon that was affiliated with Realtree back then. he was on some of their monster buck videos, and this would have been mid to late 90s probably. And Larry Weissoon was a wildlife biologist in South Texas. And the Realtree crew went down to the ranch, maybe there's the Encinitas or the 777 ranch, one of those big, huge ranches in South Texas where Larry Weissoon was the biologist that managed the property. And they did some hunts with him, and he ended up kind of getting on board with Realtree and then traveling around for years doing hunting shows and videos and seminars and more of the hunting side of the world than the biology side. And I was like, man, if there was ever a career path for me, I want to do that, you know. And I actually met Larry Weissoon at one of those Bass Pro events as a teenager, and basically told him what I just told you, like, I want to do what you do for a living, you know. And he kind of laid out how he had done his education. He went to Texas A&M down in Kingsville, and that's where he was kind of from. That was home. And when he graduated, he got on with a ranch down there basically and started his whole career, and then branched off into the video and television side later in his career. But learning what he did for those ranches and those properties, I was like, man, that would be just an awesome job, you know. And when I graduated high school, there's a university here in Arkansas, Arkansas Tech University, that's kind of in the center of the state, and they have a great wildlife biology program. And I transferred to Arkansas Tech and finished out my Bachelor's of Science with a major in wildlife biology, and actually went to work for an outfitter up in the Midwest around Nebraska and Kansas for a while in 03 and 04, I believe. And just did, you know, small stuff with him, helping guide hunters and keep records of all his deer harvests and the weights and the ages, and just, you know, kind of play biologist for him to a little bit, but not really knowing what I was doing yet. I was brand new at it. And then life kind of happened in around 05 and 06, and I got married and needed something a little bit more secure and a little more planted at home versus traveling off to these places with this outfitter guy, you know, during spring and fall and all that sort of stuff. So went to work for the state of Arkansas as an environmental specialist, and did that for almost a decade, 8 or 9 years, and then met a guy with the Arkansas Game and Fish who told me about a job opening coming up right in the town where I lived, and put in for it and was able to get it.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Been with them for, like I say, quite a while now again, and it's a super cool job. You know, working for the state, you're never going to be a millionaire, but the variety of things I get to do on a daily basis always keeps it interesting, keeps it fresh. It's never monotonous. You know, occasionally we'll have meetings or something where it gets boring, but you know, you're outside a lot doing different things daily, and it's always something interesting to me, and that makes it, you know, not just the monotonous type of job that a lot of folks get bogged down with. I love it, and I'm very happy to have it.
Oh, that's nice. So what's it like day in and day out in your field?
Man, it can vary a lot depending on the time of year. Like this year, or this time of year right now, being late winter, early spring coming on, we're getting ready for our burn season. So today we were doing a lot of work on one of our management areas, getting fire lines prepared and getting burn units established and prepped to be able to go out and burn them when the weather and the conditions are better here in the near future with our, you know, we got to have the moisture just right, got to have the wind direction just right, humidity. A lot of factors have to line up to execute a good, successful, controlled burn. And there's a lot of work that goes into it beforehand before you ever set the first flame on the ground. And that's what we're doing right now. We're busy prepping fire lines, cutting dags, and just getting units ready to burn here in the near future. But in the fall of the year, we do a lot of CWD testing. We discovered CWD in Arkansas back in 2016. And ever since then, we've been sampling a lot of hunter-killed deer that they bring them to us or we'll go get, and then sample those deer and see if they're positive or negative, and then keep data on where those deer come from, if it was a buck or a doe, how old it was. And so some parts of the year are heavy on disease monitoring, parts of the year are heavy on burning or planting or spraying. And then sometimes you're doing check stations. We have a big feral hog control program here in Arkansas. We do a lot of feral hog trapping. So that in of itself could be a full-time job almost, trying to keep cameras baited and traps operational and ready to go. So It's a wide variety of things based on the time of year, but you're rarely stuck doing the same thing for, days and days at a time. It's always something different, and that's one of the best things about it.
Oh. Do you have to track like collar like whitetail deer or track them somehow?
We have a research project that's coordinated with University of Georgia right now that has radio collars on a few deer in Arkansas. They're doing some CWD research based on those deer, but we do have bears with collars on them also, and we track those bears. They're all females, and we find where their dens are in the wintertime. And here in the next month or two, typically around March sometime, we'll actually go out and do a den visit and see what she's got for cubs, and we'll sedate her while she's in there asleep. We'll pull the cubs out and weigh and measure them and record what sex they are and how many, and then we'll put them back with her. We'll reverse her sedation, and she'll wake back up and tend to the cubs. And we wouldn't be able to do all that if we didn't know where she was. And the telemetry collars give us an idea of where her den is, so we can go find her and keep track of her throughout her life on her reproductive success, and kind of have a relationship with some of these female bears because of those collars. And that's one of the more interesting things we get to do throughout the year, for sure.
Wow. And I feel like I got so many questions more to ask. I don't even know where I can feel like them all right back in my head, because it's the first time I ever got to speak with a biologist for a state. And so I'm trying to figure out how I want to phrase this question for what are you when you're tracking a specific animal, is there anything specific towards hunting that you're trying to get information on? Because I know I've seen tracking done here in Michigan, and they try to see their home range, their core, stuff like that, and trying to figure out how far a deer is willing to travel. And I don't know. That's why I'm asking you. I'm not.
Yeah. Sometimes one of the more interesting pieces of information you can get off an animal that's got a collar on it like that is, for instance, some of the turkeys. We've shoot rocket nets over turkeys sometimes and go out there and catch them, and they'll put tracking almost like a little backpack transmitter on some Jake turkeys. It goes over their wings and it rides on their back with a little antenna, and it's real lightweight. They can still fly. They can do everything they normally would do, but they have a little tracker device on their back. And as a hunter, when you're out turkey hunting, if you call in a turkey, a lot of times you would never see that thing. So, if you have a deer with a radio collar on its neck, or a bear or something, a lot of hunters are going to see those collars, and they may not shoot it for fear that it might be illegal, or they're going to get tracked if they take that home with them, or just, if you see a collar on a deer, it's going to change what you would have normally done. Sometimes on these turkeys, because most guys don't even see that transmitter until the turkey's already shot, you really can get a good idea of, if you have transmitters on 10 Jake turkeys out on the landscape, and 3 or 4 of them get shot by hunters, that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of your turkey mortality that's caused by turkey hunters, and not coyotes or bobcats or owls or something else might have gotten them. But if you can see how many turkeys got shot by hunters because they call and say, hey, we shot a turkey this morning and it's got some of your hardware on it. Do you want it back or something? That gives you a good idea of, okay, of those 10 turkeys we put collars or transmitters, this many were shot by hunters. And if you extrapolate that over the landscape, then you can kind of get a good idea of what are the odds of a Jake turkey making it to 2 years old, at least by dodging turkey hunters. Now a coyote might get it, something else may kill it, but how many of those are going to get shot by hunters every year? And do we need to change regulations to help turkeys make it through, or are hardly any of them getting shot by hunters? It kind of gives you a good idea that it's information you wouldn't have had otherwise, because you had those backpack transmitters on those turkeys, and the hunters didn't change what they were going to do when they saw it, because they never saw it until it was too late. So if you do that same type of experiment on a deer, unless you're able to broadcast to every hunter, hey, if you see a deer and you're going to shoot it, don't let the collar change your mind. Do what you were going to do regardless of the collar. Because then, if they decide not to pull the trigger, or they might see that collar and I want to shoot that one, he's got some hardware on him, and shoot that deer, they've changed what they were going to do, before they saw the collar. But with the turkeys, they don't know it's there most of the time. So you kind of get a good idea of that turkey was going to get shot by a hunter regardless. And it's good data for how many of those did that happen to every year on average, you know.
Wow.
Now you're talking about the controlled burns and all the different monitoring and the check stations and all of that. With the surveying of all those different stats and everything, what do you think is the most beneficial for like the preserving the herd, or for whether it be deer or turkey? You know, what goes into, in your opinion, being the most critical to continue those animals naturally, you know, staying in one area rather than moving from, you know, this is, you know, getting overcrowded or moving over here, or, you know, what out of all of those things do you think is the most important out of all of them to keep those animals in, you know, a more spread out natural manner?
Well, in Arkansas, one of our main objectives is to try to restore the landscape back to what it was before humans just started manipulating it way back in, you know, in history. And back then you had way more frequent burn intervals where a piece of land or a property would burn, you know, sometimes every 3 to 5 years, maybe every other year. And now, because of the Smokey the Bear campaign from way back in the day, you know, burning is kind of considered a bad thing. People are scared of burns, and wildfires definitely are a bad thing. We start talking about, you know, home losses and property loss. Nobody wants that. But really, a proper interval of burning can prevent wildfires, because you get rid of all that fuel buildup that, you know, I've been to Colorado and elk hunted before when you couldn't even walk through a forest for all the downed trees and logs on the ground that they've been laying there for years and years. And if it ever does catch on fire in the right time of year, they're never going to get it put out. It's going to be too hot and too out of control. And if that same forest was burned every other year, every 3 to 5 years, or at least on some kind of an interval, that fuel buildup would never establish to that high of an amount where it would be out of control when it did catch on fire. But back home in Arkansas, and a lot of places too, just having a wide variety of habitat for the wildlife that's accessible to them is way more beneficial than the prettiest huge crop field you could ever imagine, like what the Midwest has. You know, Midwest has giant whitetails because of all the food that's available, but those huge 40-acre fields of corn, that's not ideal deer habitat. It's a good food source, but those deer are also bedding in there. They're lounging around in there. They get up and feed. They're treating it as if it's an entire habitat because that's all they got. You know, I try to explain to my kids and other people when they ask about what we're doing out there, if you take a big piece of property and compare it to your home, in our homes where we live, where we're most comfortable and we do our best, we have different areas of the home that serve their purpose for what we do throughout the day or night. We have bedrooms where we lay down and we're comfortable and we're safe. We have places to go eat where our food is, and we dine in those areas. We have places where we go sit and relax and just hang out and, you know, visit as a family. Well, deer and turkeys, quail, a lot of wildlife need that same type of a thing on the landscape. And when you have a 40-acre field of crops, you know, it's like having your house is one giant kitchen. You're never going to run out of food, but it's probably not the best place to lay down and take a nap. You're not going to want to kick back and watch a game with your kids. You're not going to want to chill out, you know, because it's this one big giant kitchen, you know. And obviously we don't lay down on the kitchen floor and take naps. We don't just sleep in the kitchen floor at night to bed down. And that's kind of what you're asking a deer to do when you have a huge area of one single aspect of the habitat they need. So, you know, we almost treat it like a patchwork quilt. If you just take an aerial view of a big property, you want a pocket of it that's thick cover for them to get away from predators and hide and relax. You want an area where it has, you know, abundant food sources, whether it's, you know, oak trees that are producing acorns, or for turkeys and bobwhite chicks to scratch up some grasshoppers and find something to eat. And then areas to transition back and forth without being exposed to hawks and coyotes and foxes. You know, so it's, if you think of a big piece of property that you're trying to have wildlife thrive on, it's going to need a little bit of everything and not just hardcore any one thing, you know. And a lot of folks as land managers, they know Kansas has huge deer and Kansas has huge cornfields and huge bean fields. So that's what we need to do. Plant a 10-acre food plot that's just going to be nothing but a perfect place to come eat. And it is going to be that, but they also need to have places to hide their fawns, have places to be able to go scratch up some bugs for turkeys, you know, things to do other stuff too. It's kind of a mosaic is what you're looking for ideally, and not any one big thing. And that's what they had back in the day before humans came and started improving the land and developing and doing things that we do.
Yeah, that's a big thing down here where Brett and I are at. A lot of the open fields and the forest and everything have been clear cut, tilled, and now it's all majority of everything is a lot of farm fields down here.
Yeah, it's not that much different here where I'm at. We've got a lot of cattle here in certain places, and the cattle farmers really like fescue hay. Fescue is a grass down here that's really predominant. You guys may have it up there too, I'm not sure, but it's super durable. You can't hardly overgraze it. It lives through harsh winters, and it makes a lot of hay, but it also tends to take over everything around it. So a lot of our native grasses have been out-competed by fescue grass and other similar grasses that it turns into a green carpet, and it looks visibly appealing to your passerbys and to your farmers wanting to have a green hay field.
Right.
But as far as a turkey poult or a quail chick trying to navigate through a fescue field, they need bare ground with what we call the bunch grasses. Here in Arkansas, some of our native grasses, they all grew out of a big bunch right at the ground level, and then come out and opened up into almost like an umbrella canopy type thing. And when you parted that canopy and look down at the ground, there's all kinds of little maze corridors that are just down to bare dirt, where the small mammals and the quails and turkey chicks, they can just navigate through those mazes and never be exposed to aerial predators and stuff like that from above. And that kind of grass has been overtaken by fescue grass and stuff like that down here. That's more favorable for farmers and cattlemen, but for wildlife, it's not great. So that's a battle we're fighting constantly, trying to get farmers and cattlemen on board with converting big, huge fescue fields back into native grasses and stuff that are going to be way more beneficial for wildlife. And they can still make great hay with it. It's actually more nutrition. It's got higher nutrition levels in their fescue hay, but you just can't overgraze it down to the bare dirt like you can fescue. You got to do some rotational grazing to give it a break once in a while and not eat it right down to the ground. And with the fescue stuff, you just can't kill it. You can just do whatever you want, and it's going to rebound. And native grasses don't act that way. So you kind of have to know what you're doing to graze cattle on native grasses, but it actually is better for the cows than the fescue. But that's a big thing we fight down here as well.
For someone that wants to do like a controlled burn, what would be like, let me rephrase that question. For someone that wants to do it, but they're scared to do it, what would be the correct steps or whatever to make sure that they are going to do it correctly, and it's something that they can do it for the first time and get over that fear, and then that way they can kind of like, all right, I can keep doing this year after year now.
Yeah. The best thing that you could do is reach out to an agency or reach out to someone that has experience doing it, and get another person out there to look at it with you and determine, where the best place to put your fire lines would be. And then, a lot of the decisions we make are based on wind directions the day of the burn. Like we may have a big school or an interstate or something, immediately to our north, for example. So we're going to plan that burn on a day that's not a south wind blowing straight to the north and smoke out a school or smoke out a nursing home or an interstate or something sensitive to where, the wind can blow any direction but this direction. And those are the kind of things that you really need to kind of know beforehand and be looking ahead on the calendar and say, okay, we've got a stretch of 65-degree days coming up with no rain in the forecast and a wind out of the west. And that might be a day you can pull the trigger and go out there and get that area burned and know where to light it too. You don't want to start it on the western side if the wind's blowing from the west to the east, because you're going to have a big head fire going across, being pushed by the wind. Ideally, you'd light it on the east side and let it back into the wind much more gently and controlled. And be a cooler fire that's not going to kill off a bunch of stuff you don't want to kill. But basically, to answer your question, I guess, we have a multitude of agencies down here that can assist a landowner with those decisions and with those planning elements that can make it so much easier than trying to do it all by yourself with little to no experience. So, reach out to maybe the Forestry Commission. The Arkansas Game and Fish Commission has private land biologists that will come out and do a site visit with you. There's lots of government agencies that can assist. They won't come out and maybe take over for you, but at least give you some insight and assistance on those type of things.
Now, for anyone that's like for out of states, out of Arkansas, or someone from Kansas or whatever, can they just like go up to their general DNR website page and just kind of go from there, or just check out Google and try and find someone that's like, what would they have to look up basically to look up to find someone, I guess?
Yeah, that would be a good start, obviously. I mean, like the USDA, the NRCS, those are, federal agencies that every state's going to have a contact through. And if they Google, landowner burning or something like that through the USDA or the NRCS, there'll be a contact probably in their county that they can reach out to and say, hey, I've got, this much property, this many acres of woods versus fields, and they'd like to maybe get a controlled burn executed on that property. And someone will be able to help them out with that and get them started in the right direction.
Now, do you get a lot of questions of, are controlled burns worth it, or like, is it something that you should do or shouldn't do? Because I could hear people saying like, there's no point to a controlled burn. So what would you say to those people that say, well, I'm not going to do a controlled burn. It's the woods.
Yeah. Well, the woods are kind of like watching a clock face move. If you look directly at it, it's hard to see it move. If you look away for a few minutes and look back, it's obviously moved. And the woods are no different. If you just look at your property and say, well, it's woods right now, it's a stand of timber, it's easy as a person and a human being to say it was a stand of timber yesterday and it's going to be a stand of timber 100 years from now. And that's not necessarily true. It's evolving and changing all the time. And when you burn a forest or you burn a savanna or a grassland, what you're doing is causing a disturbance. And that disturbance is going to initiate a whole new succession of plants to come up and get started. And most of the stuff we have down here, like say quail, turkeys, a lot of songbirds, pollinators, deer, they really thrive in those early successional habitats. The first ones that come back after a disturbance, you're going to create a lot of wildflowers, pollinators, insects, which are going to provide food for the turkeys and the quail. And once it matures past that early successional stage, a whole new suite of species of wildlife is going to start to thrive in that. And then it will eventually evolve past them to the point when you have a mature stand of hardwood that's closed canopy, just leaf litter on the floor, it's not good for a whole lot. If it's oak trees or a mass producing tree of some kind, you're going to have an annual crop of persimmons or acorns or hickory nuts or something that might provide food on a temporary basis for certain wildlife species. But if it was this early successional habitat mixed in with some hardwood forest, then you're going to provide food, cover, and shelter for a lot more wildlife than you would if it was just a mature hardwood stand, closed canopy with nothing underneath but leaves on the floor. That deer will move through those areas, but that's not where deer live. It's not where turkeys live. It's just a lot of places, that's all they got. And here is no exception. We've got lots of mature hardwood stands with closed canopy forests that if it wasn't for the acorn crop, the deer would have nothing for the most part. They would just, they adapt and they overcome. But back when the landscape was more varied and we had some savanna, we had some prairie, we had some mixed hardwoods, and you had a more open canopy forest, I mean, that was when you had, way more turkeys, way more quail, way more deer, way more songbirds and pollinators, because all that stuff, it needs that composite of young forage, mature forage, and cover and shelter. And if you only have a mature hardwood stand, you've got some cover and a little bit of shelter, but not much. And it's easy to look at woods and think they've always been woods. Why would you change it? But they weren't always like that. They've been something different throughout time. It's just that it's a slow process that we as people and we as humans tend to just not see it happening right before us,
Yeah. How would you do it, like once a year? Or is it something like you do like once every other year or like twice a year? Or what would be the normal time frame of doing one?
Each thing can be a little different and it varies, somewhat, but a good rule of thumb is 3 to 5 years. If you start something over again with a good burn, you'll have a good 3 years of succession happening where you're going to be providing a little bit of everything for the wildlife on that piece. Once it hits 3 to 5 years of age, it starts getting a little thick, a little woolly, to the point we're going to lose a lot of the benefits you had in the early stages of that succession. And it would be a good idea to start over again and redisturb it, you know?
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of properties will actually divide them up into squares, like the patchwork quilt type mosaic, where you might take a corner up here and burn it, disc it, plow it, cause a disturbance of some kind. But then other corners of the property you'll leave alone. And then you get a rotation started to where you don't let any one square go for longer than 5 to 6 years, but you're not doing it every year. So you've got other burn units or other sections of that property that you're hitting every year doing something to it. But for every unit you're doing something to, there's another unit over here that's getting a chance to mature on into the next year. So, 3 to 5 is a good starting point for most properties.
So I remember when I was still in the fire service, one of my biology teachers from high school got a hold of our fire department, and he's like, hey, I got, obviously been teaching biology for 40 something years, and this is something I've always wanted to do. I've done it a few times. The last time I did it, I got it totally out of control, and you guys came out here and put it out for me. But what can I do with you guys to do this the right way? And he just came in and talked to us, and then we're not real in depth with any wildland fire tactics. You get a little bit of it in the fire academy, and we have the equipment and everything to do it, but we're not the guys that are pushing dozers and digging trenches and lines and going out and then laying down another line of fire, so when the actual fire burns up to it, it chokes off and everything. We weren't doing any of that, but we went out there, surveyed it, and like you said, picked a day for the wind, and then burnt, I think, 15 or 20 acres for him. And then he's like, cool, you guys want to come back in 5 years and do the other one, or do this one next year? So that was an ongoing thing. Like every 5 years we'd go out and burn his fields for him. And I mean, he's like, oh, I love it, man. Everything burned down. It grew back a lot nicer, and it wasn't too tight, and I had a lot more deer in here. But that was as easy as it was for him. He literally called into one of our stations. We went out there and picked a day that worked for him and us, and he sat out there with his wife and his kid and watched, and we lit it up and just took care of it for him. So it was super easy for him to get a hold of that, privilege, and have us come out. And then it was nice for us as well, because we would use it as a training exercise every so often as well.
Sure. Yeah, there's an entire art and a science behind habitat manipulation through controlled fire. And I know some of it. I don't know it as well as a lot of folks do, but even the time of year that you have a controlled burn can affect what your objectives are and what your outcome is going to be. If you burn a property like right now, when it's here in Arkansas anyway, we're in the late winter. All the trees and any big brush or sapling has all pulled the sap down to the roots right now. And if we did a controlled burn tomorrow, the main thing we're going to accomplish is just removing the leaf litter or any dead vegetation off the top of the ground. And you're going to have a seed bank that's going to receive sunlight for the first time since the last burn happened, and that's a good thing. But if you go back and do that same property and you burn it like in September or August, when they call it a growing season burn, but prior to the sap all being drawn down to the roots, you burn that same property during the growing season when the leaves are still green. When that heat hits those stems, it actually tries to boil some of that sap and the liquid in the plants, and when it boils, it expands and ruptures the little capillaries and the tubes inside the stems and even the trunks of some smaller trees sometimes. And you can kill a lot of brush back with just a growing season burn, where if you did that same burn right now this time of year when none of the sap is present in the stems, you're not going to kill anything. What's there is basically dormant, and it's going to just ride right through the fire, and come spring, those juices will go right back up in the stems, and that stuff will come back to life again like nothing happened. But it's going to have a cleared floor with a lot more new stuff coming up to join it, because it's getting sunlight on some seeds on the ground for the first time in a while. But you could do a much different type of burn during the growing season and kill back a lot of brush that you wouldn't have really harmed it during the dormant season. And if that's your objective, to maybe thin an area down, then timing your burn can be a really good way to accomplish stuff like that.
So now I kind of like to get into your archery world. So
Yeah.
what's that like? What's the day of that like? Because I know you just got back from Las Vegas shoot, and then before that it was Lancaster, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
What's it like being in
Yeah.
the archery competition world?
Uh, uh, so I tend to specialize more in the indoor archery tournaments, which is the Vegas, Lancaster, the Iowa Pro-Am. There's some up in Yankton, South Dakota, where the NFAA has its headquarters. And then in the spring and summertime is 3D season. And I do try to hit some of those, but having a job at home and a family at home, it gets to a point where I don't want to push being gone too much, whether it's for work or missing ball games or missing stuff at home. So I like the indoor game. I feel like I have more success personally in that game than I do the outdoors or the 3D stuff. So I have one foot in the 3D world, but I'm pretty well set in the indoor game. And the indoor tournament stuff is all pretty much at 20 yards, and we shoot at a paper target face. And I equate it to almost like an NBA player shooting free throws. A 20-yard shot is not a difficult shot. That's kind of the standard everybody practices at home for the most part. And if you're going to tell your buddies how good you shoot, you're like, yeah, man, I shot, a golf ball at 20 yards. 20 yards is kind of just your standard thing. And indoors, you're all shooting in the same distance, no wind to have to factor in. There's no uneven terrain. The lighting is always the same for everybody there. And it's like a bench rest competition almost. It's very unforgiving. You cannot miss and do well. But the shot itself is not extremely difficult, like a free throw. But imagine trying to make 30 free throws in a row without missing. And that's where the challenge comes in. In Vegas, the X ring is roughly the size of a penny. The 10 ring, which is outside of that, is a little over an inch. I forget if it's an inch and a half. It's not overtly large, but it's not micro-sized either. And you really have to hit that 10 ring every time, every day. It's a 3-day tournament. You shoot 30 arrows a day. And if you hit that 10 ring every time, that's a 300. And you need to finish Vegas with a score of 900, because anymore in today's competition, there's going to be about 20 to 25 guys that do that. And you all go into a shoot off on Sunday night. And that's the big show everybody wants to see is, these guys are the best in the world, go out there and have a shoot off to determine who's the best tonight. And it's quite a spectacle. I mean, there's 4,500 people at Vegas this year from all over the world. And about 300 of those were in the men's open pro class. And it's legit the deep end of the pool when it comes to archery. I mean, it's the best of the best. And it's a pressure cooker for 3 days. You go out there every day knowing I cannot miss or I'm done. I mean, you miss in Vegas and you get to keep shooting, but you're basically shooting for your own entertainment. You're out. There's the 899s, 898. So the hard part is to, shoot your free throws and not miss, and it's a mental game. The physical part is what it is. It definitely helps to be steady vision, but it's 99% right up here. How can you keep it together when every part of your being is screaming inside? You're nervous as you've ever been and still pull your bow back and make a perfect shot over and over and over again. And that's the challenge that keeps me hooked on it is, I don't feel like I'm ever going to master it, but it's just a challenge to try to get better and get better. And in the indoor world, because of how we keep score, you have a numeric value to how good that day was. And you always want to try to end with the highest score you possibly can every day. And just, it keeps me wanting to go back. Don't do it all the time,
I know I've seen, I guess I honestly had the 10 ring right there in the middle. Do you have to, how would you consider it a 10 or like a 9? Like, I don't know how to phrase the question. So if you like hit like on the line, basically, is it go up to the 10 or does it like go down to the 9? Or do you have to be like right in there and you can hit any part of that circle?
You can actually be outside the circle, and if your arrow is touching it, then it counts as hitting it. So, I mean, this touching it is the same as being all up in it, you know? So they actually have an arrow diameter size rule. You can't shoot any bigger than, it's a 27/64 diameter arrow. And if you're not used to seeing them, here's a piece of a broken one right here, but it looks like a piece of rebar when you're not used to seeing it, you know, because this is a standard size hunting arrow right here that most people would shoot like a gold tip, you know, hunting arrow. This is the 27 diameter arrow, and you can see how much girthier it is.
Yeah.
And it's the biggest allowed shaft size, because you can miss by a little bit more and still touch that ring with a bigger arrow. So they put a size limit in the game to where, you know, there's got to be a cutoff, or guys be shooting arrows the size of stabilizers or something. You don't.
Yeah, I was about to say you can.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely an advantage of shooting big arrows because you have no wind drift to have to contend with, and speed is not that big of a deal at 20 yards indoors. I mean, some guys are shooting arrows that are just, you know, rainbows down through there, but it lands in the same hole every time. So, you know, the bigger the arrow, the more forgiveness you're going to have because you can miss a little bit more and still catch that line.
Yeah. Now, I know in the hunting part of shooting an arrow, a lot of people are in these days, the big one is like they want a lot of speed or they want a lot of weight in their arrows, and they're like, everyone's wanting that, oh, I got to have this huge helical on it. Is it basically just putting the fletching on air and just putting it straight because you're indoors and it's 20 yards? I mean, is it kind of like the basics?
Well, you would think. So I'll go back to my arrow shaft here. Because these arrows are so big, if it comes out of the bow imperfect in any way, you know, sideways, if you shoot towards the target and it comes out of the bow like this for a little ways, what's straightening that arrow up is your fletchings back here at the back are catching air and dragging behind that point, and you want it to follow the point right to the target. That's really important in the indoor game because these arrows are so big, they catch a lot of wind when they get crossways. And the more wind they catch along the side of that shaft, it'll plane over to the side, very similar to how a fixed blade broadhead would in the wind too. You know, the reason guys fixed blade broadheads don't hit with their field points because it comes out of the bow and does a kick some direction, up, down, left, right, whatever. And as it's flying towards the target in that kick direction, those blades are turned sideways at the wind and they're catching it, and it drives the arrow that direction until the vanes take over and pull the tail back behind the front. Then it's all going the same direction. So basically, you know, how far left to the right, left or right, or how far up or down you hit with your broadheads is almost, you can tell how long that arrow is sideways before it straightens back up. You know, if it left the bow and never turned sideways, it's going to hit right where a field point does because there's nothing steering it off to the side. Well, in the indoor world, because these arrows are so big and fat, they catch a lot of air when they come out of the bow imperfectly, just like a broadhead. So we tune our bows, or I do, to try to get the arrow to fly as straight as possible. And then I'll put, you know, usually 3, maybe sometimes a 4 fletch, but I'll run a pretty stout helical onto these because excess drag is not going to be detrimental at 20 yards, but it's going to get the back of that arrow right behind the front quickly and keep it that way. You know, if I'm nervous and I'm really gripping my bow and putting some hand torque into the bow that I don't realize I'm doing because I am nervous or I'm stressed, I may have an arrow come out of the bow and fly a little crazy for a second. Those fletchings at the back are what's going to bring the tail back in behind that point quicker and not let that arrow skate off to the side on the wind and then make it hit, you know, outside of where I'm aiming because of how it flew. Yeah. So when you go outside and you start having to factor in wind drift, you know, pushing your arrow around and stuff like that, fletchings still play an important part in stabilizing your arrow, but they can also be a negative as well when they're pushing your arrow sideways because of crosswind. There's a balance to have there. Whereas indoors, we don't have any crosswind. So, you know, bigger fletchings are nothing but an advantage on indoors, but they definitely have their place. And if you ever tried to shoot a bear shaft with no fletchings on it, you really gain a new respect for how much power those vanes have to get an arrow back in line and fly straight.
Yeah.
You know, if you take the fletchings off a shaft, that's really my preferred way of tuning my bows, is to shoot a bare shaft. And if that shaft with no fletchings on it flies and hits the target where my fletch shaft does, that tells me they're leaving the bow pointing right at the target. They're not, the vanes aren't having to do a whole lot of steering or correcting. And if you get one that's not tuned to do that, a bare shaft will fly in some funky ways with no fletchings on the back of it. And that's, you know, it's kind of a telltale, hey, might need to work on something here and get things lined up so that it's flying a little straighter. And, you know, typically when you get a bare shaft to hit with your fletch shafts, your fixed blade broadheads hit with your field points. And that's really what we're going for most of the time anyway.
I got 2 questions now. First, I'll make it a quick one. Are you a fixed blade type of guy or a mechanical type guy?
Yeah. Both. I've killed a lot of deer. I've killed a lot of deer with both styles, and I think they each have their place. Up until a couple years ago, I leaned way heavily more into the mechanicals. I just felt like, you know, accuracy is and always will be number one to me. If the arrow doesn't hit where I want it to hit, it doesn't matter what's on the front of it. It's going to be a negative outcome, you know. But recently I've had a lot of luck with some fixed blade heads that fly really good. And I don't know, for whitetail hunting here in Arkansas, my shots rarely go past 30 yards. And ideally I like them 25 yards and in, you know, and I can get just about any fixed blade to fly great at 30 yards. So go back into that world. And it's just kind of some sentimental value about, you know, sharpening up a blade on the front of your arrow and putting it in your quiver, you're ready to go, versus putting elastic bands on it or folding it back up on the collar or something. It's just not the same, you know. But I like both. I've had a lot of luck with both over the years.
Well, just a round of applause for fixed blades, man. Yep. I'm just a huge fixed blade type of guy. Jason, I don't care what your point of view is on it right now.
No, man. I shoot naps. I shoot the nap Spitfires, and I've never had an issue with those. But those mechanical blades are like, they're real. You probably know, Richard, what I'm talking about. I don't know if Brett knows what these mechanical ones are. The tri blade on them stays like folded into the actual pointed head of the broadhead until it hits resistance, and then it deploys it and folds it open.
Oh,
so they're real tight. They're real tight to the broadhead itself until it hits into the. Then they kind of splinter open to where it looks kind of like a harpoon. You like shoot into a whale or something, like a tri-bladed harpoon on the back of it.
Yeah,
it opens up real big. It probably opens up about that big around, but you know, I've shot those for a few years now, and I'm very happy with them.
I think everyone finds their own type of broadhead and they kind of just mold into it. I mean, I've tried different ones, mechanical. Like I first started using mechanical, and then I found these broadheads called Magnus broadheads. Tried those out. I loved them. So I was like, you know what? I have something that I really love. Let me try different ones out, because I feel like everyone should at least try something new. And then I tried some other ones. I didn't like them. And I went back to Magnus, and man, I can't promote Magnus broadheads enough, man. I have no affiliation with them right now, but man, they just pack a punch. And the reason I like them is because the guy that owns the company, his attention to detail is spectacular. I mean, if they aren't having a spin rate of like, I think it was 0.08 or 0.8, something very small, and if it wasn't close to what he wanted in that spin rate or something like that, it was basically trashed or remolded in some way, because then otherwise it's not going on the market. And I was like, man, that's just amazing.
Yeah, Magnus also has a lifetime warranty, which is pretty cool and not all that common. Well, it's pretty rare to see that. But if you trash one on a rock or something, I guess you just send them the pieces and they'll send you a new head in the mail to replace it. And you don't hear of that very often. That's pretty cool.
No, and my dad and I, we bought some of like their replacement blades, so we've kind of have those just like as a backup just in case. But yeah, man, those broadheads, they just pack a punch. Anyways, I can go on and on about broadheads, but what I really want to know your thoughts though on arrow clocking, because I've heard 2 theories behind this. It's kind of like a big what if type of thing. Like it's not a big thing, but some people think it is a big thing. And with arrow clocking, I've heard depending so what you do is, now correct me if I'm wrong, you'll take your bare shaft arrow, you'll knock it into your string, and then you'll make a little line down your the arrow. Then you stand about 2 feet, 3 feet away from your target, shoot it, and whichever way that line is going, that's the way that arrow wants to spin. So that's the direction you want to put your helical on, or offset for that arrow. And some say it's like the arrow, that's the way it was tuned, like wrapped, it was to the left, or it was the way the string was. And if you do the opposite with the fletchings, if you want to go right, if the arrow wants to go left, then your arrow wants to like knuckleball. And this is the information I'm getting from like Levi when I was reading about it. Do you get much into that, Richard? Like, or am I way off?
No, you're not way off. That's pretty much exactly what I've heard about arrow clocking is what you, I've never personally checked that on any of my bows before I've shot them, but I did recently have an experience with that. That was the first time for me, and it was with my son. I was setting up a bow for him. He's 13, and to be able to kind of get an idea of how his arrows were flying, I stood behind him with my phone and filmed his bow shooting in slow motion. And he has a 3-fletched arrow with 3 blazer veins on it that were like a bright yellow. And when it came out of his bow, it disappeared behind the riser for a second. I couldn't see it. And when it came out the other side of the riser, I noticed it had turned, I think it was counterclockwise to his bow, and it stalled out and then started going to the right. And I watched it back several times, and I had him shoot some more, and his arrows wanted to go to the left, but the veins were fletched in a right, so it would take over and counteract that left rotation. It would pause and then start spinning to the right and continue spinning to the right all the way to the target. And looking at his arrows and seeing it happen visually, the only downside I saw to his arrows doing that was they might not get up to the spin rate that it would have if I'd fletched those veins left, because it was trying to go left, it would stall out and then start spinning. So if he's shooting a target 20 yards away, this was all happening in that first 10 yards maybe, and the arrow really only got momentum spinning to the right in that second half. The 10 yards from midway to the target is when it started spinning and picking up speed. So the spin rate was probably slower than if I had fletched them left and it left the bow out of the gate going with that. They might have been spinning faster when it got down there. But then you have to think to yourself, is the RPMs that arrow spinning, is that really an advantage? Is that something I want to strive for? Because I can always just fletch them at a harder helical and make them spin faster if that's what you want. But what it was doing is when it came out of the bow wanting to go left, and those right-hand helical veins are catching air, that's a lot of drag in the back of that arrow, making it stop spinning. Then the wind overcoming that rotation and start turning it the way it's fletched wanting to go anyway. That's the whole point of fletching, to provide drag. So it's almost, I don't know, honestly, if it is a negative thing. The only negative I could deduce from watching my son's arrows fly was it's not going to spin as fast. But I think the back of his arrow was experiencing more drag during those first 10 yards because it was fletched in the opposite direction it was wanting to spin. And the whole point of fletching is to provide drag at the back of the arrow to pull the back in line behind your tip. So that's exactly what it was doing to me, even in an exaggerated fashion, if it had been fletched to the right and went with what the arrow was wanting to do anyway. Because if the string or the knock or whatever makes the arrows clock a certain direction, and what it is a mystery to me. I don't know what makes them do one way or the other. But if the veins are going that way anyway, if you could measure the amount of drag at the back of that arrow, to me, the veins fletched in the proper direction with the arrow clocking are going to be providing less drag. It's already the string spun it, not the veins. The string or the knock, something else spun that arrow when it left the bow. I don't know what it is, but it wasn't the veins due to drag. But with my son's arrow, watching it go this way and stop and then go that way, that's a lot of drag at the back of his arrow, that if he's got torque or he's got gloves on, it has a sloppy shot or whatever, if his arrow wants to come out of the bow ugly, that's additional drag that's going to catch that and say, nope, we're going this way, and pull the back of his arrow in line. And that's why you put vanes on there, to put drag on the back of your arrow. So my answer is I don't know, honestly, if it's a bad thing or not. And what makes an arrow spin one way or the other, I'm not for sure. I've heard enough people say that it's the string wounding, or the string direction that it's wound, that I kind of tend to go with that, because I know some very reputable string makers that say if you serve a serving a certain direction, or you build a string in a certain rotation, it'll clock an arrow left. And if you do it the other way, the arrow will clock right. I have no way of knowing that they're wrong, and I trust them. So I kind of think it has something to do with the string construction. But it is a bit of a mystery to me, and I don't put enough time into it to determine if I'm going to hit one more X by fletching my arrows the other way. I tell you, I fletch my arrows left on my target bows, and I fletch my arrows right on my hunting bows. And that is simply due to clearance on my cables. If I do a right-hand helical on my target bows, I have to pull my cable guard further over to the right to clear the bottom right vane, because where the tall part of the vane is at the back near the nock, it's kicked out to the side more. If I take that same vane and fletch it in a left helical, it pulls that tall part of the vane up under the arrow more, and I can pull my cables in closer to my arrow shaft. And that is a legit benefit to me, because the further out you put that cable guard, the harder it's pulling those cables to the side. And when you pull your bow back, you can watch that stabilizer point off to the side. And it's because that cable rod's over here getting pulled by them cables, and it turns the whole bow in your hand. And if you can take that cable rod and slide it in when you draw the bow back, that amount of turn is way less. So my fletching orientation is left on my target stuff. On my hunting bows, I don't have quite as much of a clearance issue, and I've always just liked my arrow spinning clockwise. So when it hits the target, it's tightening my broadhead. But that's how I think about it. I've never messed with the whole clocking one direction out of the bow, but people are getting into that now. It's getting more and more of a topic you hear a lot about. So maybe someday they'll discover that that's something that you need to look into more, but I never have really, other than that little bit.
Now, Richard, where do you think, you've obviously got a lot of experience in both arenas, whether it be the competition archery or the bow hunting, where do you think that either you see the most mistakes with someone who's brand new, someone who's trying to get into it, or someone who's been at it for a few years and hasn't been able to connect with the deer, or they have and it's been a bad shot placement, or they're shooting under or over? What is the most common mistake, or where do you believe that people go wrong the most as far as technique, or what in your opinion is the biggest fault that people early on bow hunting have?
Punching the trigger on your release. That's a big one, that if you go to your average bow shop or local 3D shoot and you watch a bunch of bow hunters shoot their bows, I bet you 99% of them are getting up there and getting settled, and then ka-tow, they hit that trigger like they're mad at it. It's just they have a command in their mind that says go now, and they send it. And sometimes in the hunting world, if you're able to contain that and you can put your pin where you want that arrow to go and settle down, and then you end the shot with a command trigger pull, that's not a terrible thing. That can be all right, but it quickly de-escalates into getting your pin below your target, and you can't make it get up on the target, because as soon as you do, you're going to hit that trigger. Or you get your pin above the target and you can't quite get it to come down, and you just freeze, and you're like aiming over the top of the target with this sense of anxiousness or panic. Like, I know as soon as my eyeball sees that pin to the target, I'm going to shoot, and I can't control it. And that's a form of target panic that a lot of people get, and they fall into it just because they get in the habit of getting their pin on the target and hitting the trigger. Get their pin on the target and hitting the trigger. And you do that 50 times a night for 4 months during the summer. That's how you shoot your bow. You try to put your pin on the target and you hit it. And eventually you'll get to where you can't put your pin on the target anymore. You'll get hung up somewhere, and then you'll try to have by. You'll jerk it down and hit the trigger, or you'll swing across it. You get all these weird mental games you play with yourself trying to get the pin on the target and squeeze through or squeeze a good shot off that's a surprise release, just like you would with a rifle. It's just harder with a bow because we're not sitting on a bench with sandbags holding still. There's movement involved in aiming your bow. Even the best guys in the world that I watch shoot and just I'm blown away by how accurate they are, they're not perfectly still. There's movement in their sight, but they're mentally, they've trained themselves to be okay with watching that pin float around. And they're constantly executing a shot slowly, and then when it breaks, it's a surprise. And they're just aiming and executing. And there's never a now or a go or a big rush of panic, like shoot it. It's just aiming and waiting. And when you can do that in a tournament setting, it becomes a little bit easier to do it when that buck walks through your shooting lane, and you get pulled back and give him meh, and he stops and looks. You can pull your pin in behind the shoulder and watch it sit there and float while you execute a shot. And then, it's never a rushed, panicked punch of a release. And if there was one thing I could tell people to do that would just completely change their game when it comes to shooting a bow, learn to execute a surprise shot while you aim and watch that pin move. It's not an easy thing to accomplish, but if you can get to where you seeing that pin move and execute a shot, you alleviate yourself of that rush of anxiousness and panic you feel when you think you got to hit the trigger right now, and if you can get past that, and it's a whole new world of accuracy and consistency opens up for you.
I tell people when they've asked me, like, what do I do for practicing, like what my routine is. I've said this on other podcasts before, or other episodes of generally as soon as like March or April, May, whatever comes around, I go out, I just look at like a target, just a regular square bale type of target, like a morel one that I have. And it's just those circle ones in there, and it goes all the way down to like the very small one. And I just get used to like just form. At that point, it's just I'm practicing form and staying in there. I'll draw back the bow and I'll hold there for a good couple of seconds, and then I'll slowly pull back on there and release it. And I'll just keep doing that time and time throughout the year. And then that way, when August comes around, September comes around, I'll throw a 3D target up there and I'll start picturing everything that I was practicing on with my form, now looking at of a 3D target of a deer. That way my eye gets used to seeing that pin, kind of just being comfortable with it moving, because I was comfortable with it moving in the target ones. So it should still be somewhat the same on my 3D, and just be comfortable with it right there. And I should have the same type of shot sequence through that as well.
Yeah. That's good. I mean, a lot of times the biggest thing that causes people to feel that anxiety or that panic is trying to aim at a dot. If you try to put your pin on a bullseye or a target, seeing your pin on that dot or on that bullseye, especially if it's a small dot that you're trying to hold on, it's the smaller the dot, the harder it is to watch that pin move and execute a shot without just trying to thump it when it gets on it, And archery is a funny game. I've got a lot of shots that will break with my pin right in the bullseye or right in the X-ring and not hit there. But I've also got shots that will break with the pin outside the X-ring and find their way into the middle, and it's not because my bow is not consistent. It's because of how we affect the arrow as it's leaving the bow. If your pin is visually lined up in that X-ring, you can still miss the X-ring. If you've got a bunch of tension built up or something going on, so that when that release breaks and the arrow's traveling forward across your arrow rest, we've got way more time than you would think to still affect that shot. And it's just, it's thousandths of a second, but you can move in a thousandth of a second and see it downrange, that you'll think, well, I know I was on that thing when I shot. Well, you might have been, but the second the release broke and that tension, you went from having tension pulled this way to no tension anymore, and that string's going forward. your left arm, it's got a lot more leverage now to throw that arrow certain directions than you had when it was locked up back here in conjunction with your release arm, you know. So on those ones that you don't, what I'm trying to say is you don't have to have your pin right in the middle to hit what you want. And that movement you're seeing in your pin is an exaggeration. You're not, if it was to break when it's out on one of these swings outside the dot, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to hit out there, because your mind is subconsciously steering your bow back to the middle all the time. And if that arrow breaks, but the pin looks out to the side, your mind and your arm is already trying to make a correction that we don't even subconsciously realize or perceive. But as that arrow is leaving the bow, you're providing some influence that you don't even know you're doing. And you're almost throwing it back into the middle in a very subconscious way. And you'll hit way better than you think, even if your pin's dancing around. The pin may be dancing, but it's lying to you a little bit. It's not going to hit exactly where the pin's at the second the release fires. It's going to hit way more close to where you're looking. If you're focused on that X-ring and let the pin just kind of float between you and the X-ring, even if it breaks out here, the arrow may still go right in the middle, because you're doing some guidance as it's leaving the bow, even though we don't feel it or even perceive it happening. You're giving it some correction, and it's going to hit way better than you think, unless you start getting involved with manual commands of, you know, shoot now. Because you see guys at full draw and they hit their trigger and nothing moves. If you're pulling 15, 20 pounds and you shoot, you ought to go like this. You know, you ought to have a follow through where you're pulling, and all of a sudden that tension is cut. This arm's going to go back. Your bow arm's going to go this way. And it's an explosion almost type of feel anyway. If you see guys shoot and they just go like this, every bit of tension they had in their back and their shoulders, they dump it the second they hit that trigger. And that's why they don't move. They let go of all the power they were using to hold that bow back. They quit the second they hit the trigger. Well, you might do that pretty good 7 or 8 times out of 10. You're not going to do it the same every single time, because you're going to get off with your timing, you know. Yeah. And if you're just pulling your trigger back till it fires, and you have that follow through every shot, you can do that the same every time, way more consistently than you can hitting your trigger and then just dumping every bit of tension you had the second you hit that trigger. So, you know, it's not easy to do, but if you can get in the mindset of watching that pin float and be okay with it while you execute a smooth shot, man, you can shoot better than you ever thought you could. You just got to get past that hurdle.
Right. Yeah. I've my dad always taught me, like, this is like your kill zone. So it's like you have the shoulder blade, and then you have like kind of like the halfway point right there at the middle of the deer. And then it's just kind of picture like a little bit of like a circle almost. And that's how much room you have in there. So don't stress that you have to get right there on this part of the shoulder, or you got to hit right there. Because as long as you get into that spot, I mean, aim small, miss small, but as long as you are in that ballpark of right there, you're going to hit something vital and you're going to kill that animal in a quick manner. So he always taught me that. And I think, and what I'm about to say, I don't recommend people do this. There's been times where I'm 30 years old, and I've been hunting since I was 12, and I've been shooting a bow since I was 10. So I've been shooting a bow for a long time. That's all I hunt is with a bow. I put so much time into my technique of shooting my own bow that I've also trained myself to what I need to do if a deer is moving like really, really fast, and it's like a deer that I really want. And all I got to do, I have no time to do my normal draw back and wait and kind of wait there and get him to stop. I basically, how are you going to react really quick? And this is what I generally do is, if I see a deer coming like out of nowhere and it's like, oh, bam, I got time to realize that's the deer, and he's chasing a doe in the rut, and I know I'm not going to have much time to try and get him to stop. And all I have is that split second, though, and maybe he does get a chance to stop. I'll be right there, draw back, and I'll point my sight on the deer, and I'll kind of punch that release. It's bad. I don't like to do it, but that I've done it for so long. I've trained different ways, and that's just how I personally do things on myself. And I've always killed my deer in that way too, but I don't recommend people doing that unless if they've had some experience and someone there with them. But my dad has always taught myself to prepare yourself and train for good and bad outcomes. But I don't recommend people doing that. No.
There's a case to be made for shooting like that. Yeah, but and some guys would say that's just trigger control, being able to control your trigger, and if that's what the situation calls for, then you fire a shot that best suits that situation. And hunting, the deer don't act like targets. They don't stand there and wait for you to get situated and perfectly execute a textbook shot every single time. And if you're going to take that deer, you may need to get an arrow gone right now. And sometimes you got to get it sent, so that's trigger control like that, where if the situation calls for it, that's what you got to do. That's a good skill to have for sure.
Yeah, my dad's always taught me to make sure, 30 years of law enforcement, he always taught me to be prepared for a lot of different outcomes that are going to happen out there in the woods. But man, I didn't realize it's 9:45. Jason, is there any questions that you might have for Richard?
No, I just kind of liked listening to his experiences and knowledge of both angles of shooting a bow there. Brett has kind of shunned me and put me in a corner for my habits during bow season. Here I'm a cheater. I hunt with a raven.
Yes, oh my gosh, don't get me started, Jason. I swear.
Like my experiences of holding the string back and all that, it's like as much, it's as hard as holding the thing in my lap and pulling it up and pulling the trigger on it. So no, I kind of let you guys discuss amongst one another. You guys have a lot more experience shooting an actual bow than I do. So no, I just kind of like soaking in the knowledge and everything. That was my involvement here, just liking the knowledge and soaking it all in.
Richard, was there anything that we didn't get to cover tonight that you wanted to bring up before we let you go, or a story that you'd love to share, or anything before we call it a night?
I'm super glad y'all had me on. I mean, it's very interesting to get to talk about this sort of stuff with guys from other parts of the country. Up north in Michigan, I'm sure things are a little different, but yet there's so many similarities with what we're doing down here, what you guys do up there, and it's really cool to connect with the guys. We have a common love for whitetails and archery hunting and stuff like that. So I appreciate y'all having me on and let me speak with y'all tonight.
Man, Richard, again, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day, especially on Valentine's Day. Much love to your family for taking the time to come out here and speak with us and sharing your expertise and your knowledge. And man, and good luck with the hunting. I mean, the archery competition, man. Real quick, what was the places that you finished in Las Vegas and the Lancaster one?
The Lancaster shoot, I ended up in 5th, and in Vegas, I ended up in 7th. So, it's the win is tough to get. I've been 2nd at Vegas before, but a top 10 at Vegas and a top 5 at Lancaster is quite an achievement for a guy that doesn't do it day in and day out with these younger kids that are 20 and 21. That's their full-time job. Competing with them is getting tougher all the time. There's some real legit talent out there right now from all over the world, and just go out there and just be able to be competitive with them is quite an achievement for myself. So I'm tickled with a 5th and a 7th at the 2 biggest ones in the world. I'll take that.
Well, man, thanks again, Richard. We really do appreciate it, man. We'd love to have you back.
Thanks for coming on, man. It was nice meeting you.
You bet. Thank you, guys.
Man, that's it. He had just a wealth of knowledge, and I feel like that conversation could go on for almost 4 hours.
Oh, easily. Just, sitting and talking about his competitions alone, man, that's a whole world in and of itself. That's very similar, but a lot different. Like he was explaining, I didn't realize how much of a broom handle those competition arrows were, man. Like, And then it comes down to, like he was saying, your fletching and in your spin rate and all that, man. That's a lot of work that goes into it. So yeah, I mean, we probably could have been here till midnight just talking about his competitions alone.
Yeah, I mean, there's like I went to a archery school from PSE down in Arizona for like 3 days, and I didn't get into everything that I wanted to know or learn, but I did take
Right.
some information from there. But I just feel like there's so many pieces that go on with like arrows and spine and your
Right.
fletchings and how you do this and that, and it's just like, man, you almost don't. I could see where it could get overwhelming to someone new. It's like, shit, how the fuck do I do this? This looks complicated. I
Right.
mean, unless you know someone or you know like a good place to go to be like, hey, can you help break this down? And I can see how that could be intimidating for someone. But yeah, that's something I love to learn about. And I know some pieces of it, but man, there's so much to it. It's crazy.
Now, what bows do you work on, right? You can work on what brand of bows do you know to get in and out of? I thought you were telling me that before. Or do you just know how to, an archery coach as far
Like
as,
me working on bows.
yeah, yes.
I can generally work on. I know a lot about Matthews bows only because I hunt with Matthews. PSEs, those are actually, I don't know the word to use. They're very basic in the sense of when you're fixing them on like a machine bow press stuff because it's kind of all right there. But with the technology they have, all the bows are almost going to be somewhat the same when it comes to trying to get their timing and stuff done like that. But yeah, it can be somewhat overbearing or over stimulating to somebody. But yeah, I actually do really love working on bows, and that's actually a lot of fun. And
so I'll have to get with you here soon because I actually have an old Pantera from the mid '90s.
Yeah,
compound bow that it's just sitting here. I'll have you put a whisker biscuit on it and a loop ring on it for my hand for the trigger, and then I'll go and shoot a deer with that this year for you. So that way you can stop having your blood pressure rise when I get on here and talk about my fucking crossbow.
my skin is crawling. But at least it's crawling in somewhat of a good way because you are willing to shoot with a bow. I mean, we can at the whisker biscuit. I'm not a huge fan of those, but you know what? For you, I'm willing to take somewhat of a win with the fucking bow. At least you're putting a bow in your hand.
Dude, I got that old Pantera. My one of the guys from Kalamazoo that my dad's buddies with that was working up there with him. He even gave it to me. It's like, dude, I used to bow hunt. I used to bow hunt back in the day. I haven't touched this thing in like 20 fucking years. You can just have it. Old school Pantera, like real early on compound. The draw weight's heavier than shit. I've shot it out in the backyard into a target a bunch of times. It's just pulling that string back fucking 30 times in a row. I'm like, man, this is like, fuck this. This is a lot of weight on this fucking string.
I have a brand new 2018. It sounds weird saying brand new from 2018, but it's a bow that I bought from my dad. Excuse me. A bow I bought from my dad as a surprise, but it just happened that he hurt his shoulder, so he couldn't shoot.
You were telling about,
yeah, he couldn't shoot.
You brought that up last time.
Yep. And I'm willing to sell it. I've been trying to sell it, and no one's been wanting I think a lot of people want that new when it comes to the bows. They always want that. Yeah. Oh, I want that new one. I want that new one. I want that new flagship bow. But no, this thing's been in its freaking cage plastic since 2018. It hasn't seen the light of day.
No shit. Well, yeah, man. If I get that that old school bow fixed up, man, I might be looking to upgrade if I don't, if it's old or if, it's too much work to put into it, or, definitely always willing to upgrade my arsenal there if I'm into that. But yeah, again, I have to put in the time and work to actually get away from cranking the bowstring back and shooting that fucking crossbow. Have you shot a raven before, or have you just like completely?
No,
Oh, you're
why would
a
I
peasant.
practice shooting
You're a
crossbow,
peasant,
Jason?
Like you don't know anyone that has like a nice high end crossbow that you're like, oh yeah, I hate these, but like that's kind of cool. Like I'll shoot it a couple times. Like
No. I'm pulling the fucking microphone next to this camera right here that I'm looking at right there. I'm looking right direct at you, not at the screen, the TV. I'm looking at the camera. Okay. I don't mind shooting crossbows for fun. It's fucking hunting with them. You're a lazy piece of shit. And I'm really saying this to you right now. No, I don't want to go practice with my bow. Man, I'd much rather just sit on my ass and see how much homeless I can look like today and just go hunt in the woods with my crossbow and just crank it up and go, yep, I'm hunting.
Yeah, my prep last year for bow season was 2 weeks before bow season opened up. I set out the bag, shot in the center ring at 20 yards, 50 yards, and 100 yards, 4 or 5 times each at each distance. Packed everything up and waited for October 1st. That was my prep for bow season last year.
I don't think you and I can be friends anymore.
Oh shit.
I don't want you as a host anymore on this show. You lazy piece of shit.
But I'll bring that Pantera over to you. It's kind of cool. It's got like a fucking grizzly bear like etched into like the little wooden hand grip on the middle of it. And the hand grip's got like a little wood piece on there with a little grizzly bear like hand carved into it. I'm like, that's pretty cool.
And real quick before we go off for the night, is your Raven a newer model?
It's the RX-5. I don't.
You could say the fucking. I don't know what the hell that means, man.
So that's so there's the RX-10, there's the RX-5. So it's like one of the models of the bow. So there's like a bunch of different variations.
Yeah, what fucking year it is, not what the model it is.
Well, I got to look it up. What year that specific one came out?
Okay, we'll sit and wait. I wish I had a timing button on this thing.
I bought it in 21, I believe.
So 2020, basically.
Yeah, it's a bow from 2021 is when I bought it. It was brand new out of the box in 21.
So, because my dad, when his shoulder went out and he had to get a crossbow, I can't. This was like in 2018, actually. I think he got that crossbow and it was made in like 2015. Maybe I have no freaking idea. I'm not gonna pretend like I know, but I know it was a couple years old by the time he got it. And I hunted with him one time last year. He shot at a deer and we could never find it. And it just sounded like I was just sitting there in my stand, just dan. Hey, who was that? And then my dad shoots it, and it's just like a shotgun went off.
Yeah.
So there's was yours quiet?
It's really quiet. The spread on the limbs of this Raven are tight. Like they're small with no draw on the limbs itself. And then when the bow is fully cranked back and it's locked back with an arrow locked in it, it's like under 7 inches from outside limb to outside limb. So like I can go like this and put my finger to thumb on the edges of each side of the limb. Like that's how tight that bow is when the string's pulled back. I can literally lip the end of my pinky finger to the tip of my thumb on the outside of each side of the limb. That's how tight and a compact size that crossbow is.
Oh wow.
And it's shooting at 400 FPS as well.
I got no comment.
But then Raven makes a weird one too that like you said, it's louder than hell. Like it's a pistol grip one. There's no stock on it. It's like this fucking big. And the limbs are on the top. So like if you were Like if you're looking at it from the front, like if I'm pointing an arrow at you, like the limbs look like this.
Huh.
Like the limbs come up, and it's a real tight knit, and it's like a fucking pistol, and a scope on it and everything. And when I went and looked at the Ravens when I bought mine, I'm like, what the hell is this thing? They're like, yeah, it's brand new. Like this year, it came out at the end of last year. It's a loud fuck, but a lot of guys are using it in the mountains for like stalking elk because it's such a small bow or crossbow that, you know, it's not a big bulky thing to move around. They wind it up, crank it back, or however you pull that string back, and it's just a tight, compact little thing that you can sneak up on an animal and just zap them with it. But it looked goofy because them limbs come up from the base of the front of that crossbow is here, and then each limb comes up with your cams and your pulleys and everything like back here, like towards your face. Like if you're holding it, your limbs come up and the cams and everything are up in your face, and the sight is up above it.
Wow.
But yeah, that bow's light. It's real light, real compact. I enjoy it.
I guess we'll have to have a conversation about crossbows or something. I don't know, to appease you or whatever. I don't know. I don't know if I mean,
I'm not like a guy that's, like I said, I'm not unwilling. I just don't, like, I got the bow and didn't feel like, and I know it's going to be relatively inexpensive to get it set up exactly the way I want it, to put that D loop on there and then a whisker biscuit or whatever on there, and then adjust the cams or put a new string on there. I know it's not going to break the bank, but it's just like, I already bought this brand new thing. Why would I put money into this? You know, like.
And if whoever wants to hunt with a crossbow, go for it. I don't care. I say I don't care. Well, I really don't care if you hunt with a crossbow. I really don't. As long as people are out there hunting, I don't care. Like crossbows and guns, to my opinion, like I said, I call that cheating. If you're hunting with a crossbow, in my opinion, I think you should be somewhat physically unable to draw back a bow. But if that's your go-to choice and that's something that you love to do, like for me, I only shoot bows, and that's your thing, then go for it. I'm going to have my opinions just like everyone has them, and I don't care if you like them or don't. That's just how I feel. But I'm just excited to see people out there actually enjoying the outdoors and hunting.
Right.
In my opinion,
absolutely.
That's just the ultimate thing. How you hunt, like the weapon of choice. Now we're gonna like, all right, you. Hey.
What crossbow is your old man shooting?
I have no idea. I'd have to ask him.
Is it one of the higher end ones?
No, I could not tell you. All I know is it's camo and it's a crossbow. That's it.
Does he have a crank system on it, or does he have to fucking pull the string back himself?
He has to like lift. There's like no.
How's that feel for his shoulder?
Actually, no. Wait, he does have. Does he? I have no freaking idea now.
So like,
no, I don't know how he would be able to do that because I tried it once, just bare arming, like bare fisting and pulling it up, and that sucked.
Yeah, it's rough on the old mitts there, but I think 10 Point makes one where it has a crank on it. Raven makes one that's a silent crank, so it's like reeling in a fishing rod, and you just crank it until the bowstring locks into the back. I was trying to look it up here, but I can't fucking find it. If your old man wants an upgrade, I don't know how bad his shoulder is. When you
swear, point it out, because I have to do that, okay? So don't fucking do that again, okay?
Since when are we? All right, ready? 3, 2, 1. What the fuck? You missed it.
Ah, damn it.
You're late.
No, man.
Since when did we start bleeping out all the expletives?
Since right fucking now, okay? So there we go.
Anyways, I don't know how bad your old man's shoulder is. If it continues to get worse, I know for a fact they make one. I can't find it right now. There is a crossbow out there that has an automatic draw system to it, where you either load it with like CO2 or you put a battery pack in it and it automatically cranks it back for you. Like you hit a button and it just pulls the string back for you.
Oh, wow.
which is like something I just seen the other day, but I can't find it right now. But I'm like, that's fucking cool. Like, you fuck your arm up, you can't pull it back anymore or even crank something. I'm like, at least you can still go out and get out there with something like that.
Well, we can talk about that another day. It's already 10 o'clock. Well, Jason, I'd like to thank you. Even though you are pretty much part of the show, you are a co-host in the show, but thanks for coming on for tonight.
Yeah, no problem, man. Hopefully here, once things with me get settled down, I might be able to come around a little bit more frequently. But as always, love coming on here, and I love chatting with you guys.
Yeah, and it looks like you had the same background, so I'm assuming you found the same house to let you come in and talk.
Right,
They must be really nice people to allow a homeless dude into their house and borrow their iPad and stuff.
Yeah, right. Real generous here. The people everyone here is very tolerant of me, so I'm very blessed by that.
Well, that's good. I can hear him in the background. I pretty much almost
hopefully. So when Richard was still on with us, I kept on I don't know if you could see my hand darting against the screen, when he was going on and explaining all of his things, I'd mute myself because the 2-year-old was running around for a little bit. I'm like, God, I don't need you being loud on here. And then I'd start to try. I'm like, fuck, I gotta unmute myself. And then by the time I unmute myself, you're already asking him a question. So I'm like, all right, whatever, just mute myself again.
I noticed you were really quiet almost through the whole conversation we're having with him. So I was like, maybe he's nervous or something. And
so I'm just sitting here. I'm trying to so that by the time I knew he was going to be finishing his sentence there and in his topic, I'm like, all right, now I got to fucking time it to where immediately he's done. I'm already unmuting this thing on the screen and then start talking. Otherwise, Brett's going to skip over me again.
Well, they just put a timeout thing and say, Brett, shut the fuck up. I got a question.
Yeah. If I could start writing on pen and paper and asking him, turn it around and ask him questions that way next time.
There we go. Let's close out the show.
All right, buddy.
Oh, man, what a show. Thanks, Valentine's Day.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Whitetail Advantage Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you next time.